Hello, and thank you for joining us for our BNI San Diego podcast today. I am joined by Josh Sock. Josh Sock is the regional managing partner for Southern California for the Jay Galt organization. The company is dedicated to helping small business owners and founders separate their personal finances from their business finances by establishing access to corporate credit. Wow, now that's a mouthful, right? Welcome, Josh. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, of course, Ed. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm really excited about our topic. We're dealing in, our audience tends to be small to medium-sized business owners.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited about this topic of grow your business and minimize your risk.
Yeah.
As small business owners, a lot of which started out as practitioners, right?
Yeah.
There's a wonderful book right here called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
Right.
And it's a fantastic book. I've got tons of notes in it. And basically he talks about the individual that goes from, their mom and pop, they're a bakery or they do something really good. They're really good at it.
Right.
And because they're good at it, let's say that they're making cinnamon rolls.
Yes.
And they've made cinnamon rolls for quite some time. They make it for family and friends. And everyone always tells them, okay, you do such a good job at cinnamon rolls, you should start a bakery and do some other things. And you're phenomenal, right? So they end up going into starting their own business. But it is amazing how people are very good at what they do, their craft. But on the running a business side of things, it can get really tough. Now, today, we're going to talk about one aspect of business ownership that is dangerously overlooked and under-discussed.
Yeah.
And Josh, what is that?
So what that is, Ed, is the proper way to use credit for your business, when and how, and the difference between the types of credit that you end up using for your business or can use for your business. And what I mean by that is personal credit, which a lot of business owners use all the time. And I'm sure you know that from just having so many relationships around the community, but also business credit, right? Which is credit for a business purpose that has a personal backing to it, or corporate credit, which is the main thing we're here to talk about today, I think. And corporate credit means credit that's not tied to any individual at all, right? It's not tied to any specific individual by the bank. It's entirely centered on the EIN of a corporation and lent to the company itself with the full knowledge of the lenders that there's no recourse to access the business owner's personal finances or personal assets if there's any.
So for someone starting out in their business, right? Obviously we know that it takes money to really get a business established, and you've got to buy your tools of the trade and all the things that are happening. Mm-hmm. So that means you need money. Well, let's face it, not all of us either are fortunate enough to have the funds to be able to do some of the things that are necessary to start a business, which is where this conversation comes in.
Or even if you do, you might want to keep that powder dry, right? Oh. We call it our seed corn, is a phrase that my father-in-law, by the way, who runs his own business, likes to call it all the time, right? You don't necessarily want to plant your own seed corn to eat, right? That's there for keeping the business going into perpetuity, right?
That's a good point.
You're absolutely right. So most business owners do one of three things when they're starting their business and they need that money for startup, right? Or funding some major project or a piece of equipment or a vehicle, which is the primary equipment for a lot of businesses.
Or maybe it's even for hiring staff, right?
Having staff,
all those types
marketing,
of things.
Advertising, right? All kinds of different things that they need to build a state-of-the-art website. That's not free, right? So the ways we raise money in business typically are going to be our own money, right? We dig into our savings account, our 401k, our IRA, our home equity maybe, and we use that to fund our business. We borrow against our own name, right? So that's personal credit cards. If I have a $50,000 limit on Amex, I have a good credit score, that gives me a lot of runway if I'm starting a small business to spend on things that I'm hoping are going to pay returns in the future and allow me to get out of that hole, right? And the other is some sort of investor, right? Somebody who's believes in your project, who thinks that you're going to do a great job. And so they'll infuse some capital into your company, but that comes with strings attached, right? You're going to usually have to give up some equity in your company to achieve that kind of funding. And you're probably going to have to give up some sort of control. You can't make major decisions without sounding off on that with the new partner, right? And that's not what most of us got into business for in the first place.
No.
If I back in conversations with business owners, they didn't do it to end up having to split responsibilities. They wanted to be in business for themselves, right? So corporate credit offers an entirely different channel for that because it's not tied to you personally, right? The money that the bank lends to a company in a corporate credit account, they understand stops with the business, right? There's no liability.
Then there is a difference then between your personal credit and corporate credit.
Absolutely right. So any account that is for business only, right, that is not tied to a person is considered a corporate credit account. And that, I want to make a very important distinction. There's a difference there between that and business credit, because a lot of people talk about using business credit all the time. And a lot of business owners say, oh, I have great business credit. I use business credit. They're talking about accounts that are for business purpose, but still have a personal guarantee attached. And you're going to use me use that phrase a lot, right?
Oh,
personal guarantee. So, and that personal guarantee basically says that I, business owner, Ed Wilson, guarantee this account with every single thing that I own in my personal life, right? That includes my retirement funds, my house,
home, my whatever
college
assets
funds,
I've got. Yeah.
Everything that I have, any companies I own besides the one that's even involved in the business. If this company fails, the bank is free to come after me to claim their losses against my assets, right? That's pretty straightforward. That's what a personal guarantee is. Now, let me ask you this. When was the last time you saw a business decide to close up shop as soon as there was some sort of ripple or something didn't quite go right? There was a cash flow problem and it's the first sign of danger. Did they close up shop and call it a day?
Ideally, no. Right? Because you want to be able to prepare for those types of things.
Well, I'm going to have a different thing. So what do they do first, right? They try to solve the problem. So they start investing capital from sources they can manage into the business to try to keep it afloat, to try to keep it from failing,
pouring money into it. Yeah.
And the normal process of this looks like them first maxing out those business credit lines that they might have, right? And then those are personally guaranteed. And then they go into their personal assets and they liquidate their savings account. I've even seen business owners take out a second mortgage on their home, right?
Oh, yeah.
And what they're doing is they're trying to keep payroll, right? They're trying to make sure their employees are paid because they believe in themselves. It's why they started the business in the first place. Just because things are going bad and right now, they want to maintain that belief that led them to go into business in the first place. It's going to work out. I'm going to be successful.
Yeah. And this is going to be a short thing, short-lived, and we're going to get through this.
And sadly, the data shows us that that's not always the case, right? There's a lot of businesses out there that do end up failing. And everybody, I think, probably is pretty familiar with what those numbers look like in their own industries, right?
So if we're tied to a personal guarantee, that could be devastating to me as the individual.
Yes, because what is the state of the business when it does finally declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy, right? It's bankrupt. It doesn't have cash anymore. So by definition, it can't cover those obligations that it has left. And guess what? If you have $100,000 outstanding, if you have $200,000 outstanding in personally guaranteed business accounts when your company fails, and almost every company that does fail does at that point, that gets claimed against your personal assets. Now your home equity might be wiped out. And sadly, we see a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, talented people literally get wiped out financially by an event like that, right? So that's one thing that can happen. And I speak from personal experience, and it ties back to what you were saying there with the E-Myth on this. In my father-in-law, right? My father-in-law runs a cabinet company out of Temecula, very successful. He does a great job, but it's the second iteration. It's the second life cycle of his company that he's going through right now. The first one, unfortunately, went under during the 2008 housing crash, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of businesses failed in that time.
A lot, yeah.
Especially in his industry, right? What he does is true custom cabinetry. He's one of those old school guys that builds it from scratch, does it by hand, has a shop full of experts. They don't order it from, fabricator and specify to your
literally
measurements.
From scratch.
They really build it just like a captain's cabin in an old sailing ship, right? And that's really special, a really special product. But he is an expert in that, right? He knows how to do something that almost no one on earth knows how to do at a very high level. And that's what his business is founded on. But starting out, he didn't know much about running a business. He did the same things that a lot of people did. He made a lot of money quickly, right? He invested that back into his business. He bought a home, right? That he mingled with his business finances. He had a shop and his home on the same piece of property. All these kind of things, right? And then when stuff started to go bad, the housing crash, home values dropped, nobody's buying cabinets in that kind of economy, right? There's a luxury item. They don't have the equity to do it. And all of a sudden, there's no business, right? So what is he supposed to do? Now he's in a cash flow crunch. He has to lay his staff off, and all of his personal guarantees start coming home. And that means he's wiped out. His family lost their home, right?
Absolutely.
They lost their retirement. They lost everything. They had to start from scratch, completely from scratch. Now, what if he knew then, right? Well, we know now, what you and I are talking about today, that none of those debts, none of those financing vehicles, none of those credit cards, none of the equipment he bought to the high, expensive saws and vacuum equipment that you need to do that kind of work, none of that had to be tied to him personally. What if that all could bend under the corporation?
Wait, so you're telling me that there is a way to get rid of a personal guarantee?
Yes.
That's possible as a small business owner?
Absolutely. And so let me ask you this. When was the last time a major CEO of a big company personally guaranteed anything for their business?
Oh, when we're talking major corporations, never.
Never happens, right?
They've got that buffer in between. Absolutely.
Absolutely never happens. So there's some sort of demarcation line we must know from that, right? Where your company reaches a certain, I don't know, ethereal plane, whatever, right? Where it all of a sudden magically they don't ask for that anymore. Well, what is that? Why is it available to some companies and why is it not, right? So let's talk about a couple of the things that people say. I've always heard throughout my life that it's about profit and loss, right? It's about cash flow. Is that something you've heard before?
Oh, absolutely, all the time.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you something. We recently worked with a company, and this gentleman owned two businesses, right? One was a brand new company that he had just started. The other was a company that had been in business for 7 or 8 years, was doing really well. His last year's gross revenue was $2.5 million, right?
Oh, wow.
2.5. That's a pretty good, right? That's a decent sized business. What do you think his recommended credit limit was with the corporate credit bureaus? And we'll put a pin in that. I want to come back to that in a second. So his Dun & Bradstreet recommended credit limit. And what that means is corporate credit, right? Money that could be lent to the company strictly. What do you think his if you had to guess? I won't make you guess.
I would have no clue. So I'm going to
it was $10,000. That's a joke, right? What is $10,000 going to do for a company with an annual gross revenue of $2.5 million and an annual operating budget of $2 million, right? This guy's spending $2 million a year on his business, right? $10,000, useless. That doesn't cover even a day and a half's worth of expenses for him, barely.
Or wages. I mean, even wages alone.
No. So what that guy does is he goes to banks. And by the way, he was using plenty of business credit. That company was using about $150,000 a month in business credit. So why was that not re-reflected on the corporate credit bureaus is the question, right? Because that recommended credit limit number is what you need to remove that personal guarantee.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example of that. The Business Credit Bureau, right? Dun & Bradstreet, Equifax, Experian Business. Those are the three main ones, right? Dun & Bradstreet, we used to be the big boy. Everybody went to them all the time. But now a lot of lending institutions are starting to work more with Equifax and Experian. So for a healthy corporate credit profile, you have to be robust with all three. They'll give you a score 0 to 100. That's a risk score. It's kind of like our 350 to 850 personal score, right? And that kind of tells the bank, this person's trustworthy. They make their payments on time. They are dependable. They do what they say they're going to do. But there's a more important number, and it's called the recommended credit limit. That's the number that was 10,000 for this company, right? That company is related to the visibility of the company's spending to the corporate credit bureaus, if that makes sense. Now, was this company spending money? Of course they were. Every company has to spend money to make money. Absolutely. A company doing 2.5 million in his industry, he was a transportation company, is spending about $2 million a year just to make that possible, right? So you tell me, how much theoretical credit could a company handle that's spending $2 million a year? A hell of a lot, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So the problem was it wasn't visible to the business credit bureaus. The reason for that is that 93% of business credit accounts. So this is your Capital One business cards, right? Your Bank of America business cards, the stuff, all the consumer-based business cards that are marketed all the time out there to small business owners. 93% of them do not report to the business credit bureaus. They do report to the personal credit bureaus oftentimes, and that can cause whole lots of issues on the personal side of your credit report, right?
So there's a difference then? If you wouldn't mind even sharing a little bit about that.
So you're speaking about the difference between the business credit bureaus and personal credit bureaus, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So the personal credit bureaus, we have TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Everybody knows those. They look on Credit Karma, they check their credit. And even business owners are familiar with the process of going to the bank, getting a business credit account, line of credit maybe for their bank to cover, variable expenses while they wait for receivables to come in. And then the bank asks for their personal credit. And they just assume, okay, this is normal. I'm a small business. I'm not big enough to qualify for something just on my company. So they give their personal credit over and they check that score. Mm-hmm. What that tells a business owner is that that account is going to be based on their personal credit. They're going to be giving a personal guarantee for it. It's going to be reporting to their personal credit side. There are bureaus that govern business credit, or I should say corporate credit, which is what we're talking about here, right? Which is Dun & Bradstreet. That's the most famous one. There's Equifax Business and Experian Business, right? All three of them keep a score on your company, just like Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion do on the personal side. Does that make sense?
As a small business owner, I had no clue that was the case.
Yes, that's absolutely the case. Now, what they're tracking is that corporate credit. How credible is your company? Irrelevant is you, right? They don't care about your personal credit at all when they're looking at this bureau. But if you're not established, if you don't look credible through these credit bureaus in the eyes of a lending institution, a financial institution, they will not lend to your company without a personal guarantee. Gotcha. You become the parent to your company, just like a teenager who has to go out and get its first credit card, can't do it on its own. There needs to be a parent with established credit who makes that guarantee on behalf. When you're doing that, you're being the parent, you're making a guarantee for your company, if that makes sense. But a company should, as they grow, as they mature, just like your teenager, right? Hopefully they build that credit, right? And eventually they can stand on their own two legs. That's what we're talking about.
So is there a process then where by means like myself or another small business owner where you can go to get approved for this type of credit?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll bring it back to that other example, because this company that we're talking about, this gentleman had a second business, right? A brand new business he had started. And that business in the first year of reporting did about $400,000 in sales. Still pretty good for a startup company. The guy knows what he's doing, right? It's not his first rodeo. Their recommended credit limit at the end of that cycle was $234,000 out of $398,000 of spending. That's almost 60%. It's about 59.5% of the company's gross revenue was available to them in corporate credit. So that's corporate credit based on the EIN of the company. No personal guarantee required, right?
Got it.
So how is that possible that a company that only did $400,000 in sales has access to almost $250,000 in corporate credit? It's not cash flow, right? It's not just revenue that they're looking at, right? So this is what we're talking about. They're looking at that recommended credit limit. Now, what is that number a function of? It's the function of your demonstrated ability to pay reflected on the corporate credit bureaus. Does that make sense?
Got it.
And so just like when you go and you get personal credit, right? You build that by showing responsibility over time, the ability to make payments over time. Eventually, one day you can buy a house, you can buy a Tesla if you want on credit, right? It's not different from on the business credit bureau. So it's predictable. But what we have to do is we have to see accounts that report. And again, the trouble there is that 93% of the accounts that are marketed to business owners do not report to any of those bureaus, not to Equifax, not to Dun & Bradstreet, and not to Experian Business, right? We need them to report. In order for that company to be visible to the credit bureaus, their expenses have to report. Does that make sense?
So for the average small to medium-sized business owner like myself, how would we ever know any of these things? Obviously, if we happen to know Josh or someone like you and what you do, but I mean, to the average person, they wouldn't know these things. How do we go about educating those small business owners?
To be honest with you, Ed, sadly, there isn't a nice, concise place that you can go. You can go and Google this and you'll be able to find a patchwork of this information altogether, right? But no one has really made the effort to consolidate it all into one place, if that makes sense. And you might go on YouTube, right? You might go and find a video. Somebody will explain, how does Dun & Bradstreet work? What does a business credit score look like? They might even talk about reporting, right? And then the fact that the higher volume you show on a business credit expense count, the higher they'll raise your limits, the higher they'll give you credit for, right?
Makes sense.
That kind of thing. But they won't talk about how it all works together. They won't talk about the fact that you need to be at the high credit scores with all three business credit bureaus, not just one, right? Dun & Bradstreet gets most of the press. They spend a lot of money on advertising. That's why. So that a lot of people just focus on that. But we had another company A guy had just went out to buy a truck for his business, right? He was another transportation company. It was a tractor trailer, $150,000 purchase. Went to apply, and the company does $7 million a year, right? And wow. It was rejected. He said, I want to see my EAN. He got rejected. He was furious. The reason why, because he's a client of ours, right? And just before that, he had been approved for a purchase of an airplane, right? For the same business, right? He said, how the hell am I getting approved for an airplane here, but not for a truck? Well, we dug into it for a second. The reason is because they pulled Dun & Bradstreet score for the airplane, and they pulled Experian score for the truck, right? And that's just how that lending institution works. They decide they get to pick which one they're going to look at. Just like when we go buy a vehicle, you don't know which credit bureau they're going to buy. But if you have a good score, Ed, they don't ask you for your tax returns when you go buy a car, right? They don't ask you for your profit and loss statements for your business. They don't
based on the score.
They don't ask you for bank statements, right? Yep. They don't even ask you for pay stubs. They just look at your credit report. Oh, you got a 770 FICO score, sign and drive, you're good to go. That's if you have top tier business credit, tier 4, 80 plus, right? 80 plus on that 0 to 100 risk score, and you have a recommended credit limit that's commensurate to the account that you're seeking. You walk into any business, corporate lending institution in the country, they'll give you the same answer. Sign here, you're approved. Does that make sense?
It does. It's a little overwhelming, which is why I'm really glad we're on today, right? Because you're helping me as a small business owner. You're helping, giving visibility to our listeners who are maybe somewhat in the same state that I am, or same state rather. So it can be overwhelming. So it's nice to know that there's Joshes out there that can actually, be able to help with this. And for those listeners that would like a little bit more information, Josh's information is down below. You can reach out to him and touch base with him. Josh, we're coming to a close, and I know that I'm sure we could spend hours in this conversation because again, it can be overwhelming as a small to medium-sized business owner. What does it mean for a business to have top tier credit in this day and age?
Well, it means knowing for sure that you're going to be approved for credit when your company needs it, right?
So it means the money's there when you actually need it.
Exactly. And it means knowing that you're going to get the best terms when you apply for that credit and when you utilize it. But most importantly, it means it's never going to be tied to you personally, right? That's the entire point of corporate credit. So it's centered on the employer identification number, the EIN of your company, is not tied to any individual anywhere in the world. So that protection, the protection of your assets, the maintenance of your corporate veil, right? When we incorporated, we got that legal protection that protects us from liability from a company. That is intact. We didn't sign it away just to get access to some funds that we needed, if that makes sense. That's what it means. And what that means in practice is the confidence to take a chance when you see a major opportunity and knowing that it's not going to put you or your family's livelihood at risk. And it means the assurance and the peace of mind that the next time there's a COVID, the next time there's a housing crash, the next time there's this unforeseen black swan event that takes out an entire industry, which we've seen, happens. Oh yeah, it's going to happen eventually, right? To pretty much everybody's industry.
Not if, it's when. Yeah.
That you have a way through that isn't going to wipe you out, if that makes sense. You might, even if you end up in business bankruptcy, and some of us can't avoid it, you're never going to end up in personal bankruptcy as a result.
Well, and that gives the business owner a little peace of mind when it comes to scaling a business, because even that can be, anxiety of, I need more employees, which means I need more money in my account to pay those employees, all of the different aspects of that. So having that peace of mind that my personal finances, my home, my family isn't going to be impacted in this way is huge.
Yes. I mean, this particular one small change you can make to your business if you can achieve it properly. Whenever we think about growing your business, we assume that's going to come with more risk, right? More clients, more revenue means more expenses, means it's spread thinner, right? Means more risk. This is a fear that a lot of companies have when they think about taking that next step. With this kind of change, you can not only grow your company, but also reduce your risk at the exact same time, right? Because if you're moving it away from your personal guarantee, not only do you get funds, by the way, I should say corporate credit accounts on average 5 to 10 times larger than personally backed accounts because they're not backed by your net personal income. They're net by the gross income of the company, right? So not only do you have more access to growth opportunity, but it comes with less risk on the downside.
And as a small business owner, that's a huge peace of mind.
It's a game changer.
So, Josh, as we come to a close, I'm just thinking, if you can give some words of wisdom to the small, the medium-sized business owner that, this can be a little overwhelming to, what would you recommend? What are maybe one or two steps that you could, obviously, other than giving you a call, which we're going to recommend. And again, Josh, your information's down below, so anyone that wants to know a little bit more can reach out. But outside of reaching out to you, what are some things that they can do? Maybe one or two things that you can give as kind of a best practice or things to kind of go by.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I would do is look at how you're incorporated. Is this the way you want to be incorporated long-term? Because if you're going to build corporate credit, you need to build that on the EIN of your company. So if you switch to a new company, if you go from a LLC to an S Corp, a C Corp, and you're not maintaining that EIN, you would lose any credit you've built, if that makes sense. So if you're thinking about doing something like this, make sure you know that you're in the corporate formation that you want to be in long-term. That's number one, right? The second thing is that when you do go apply for credit accounts, you talk to banks and lenders, ask them about that personal guarantee. Ask them about whether or not they are going to consider removing it. And if they don't, ask them why they won't, right? And a lot of banks, to be honest, they're not going to tell you much details about this because they probably have products that they prefer to use for your particular case based on what you look like on paper today that they're going to steer you towards, right? But you don't always have to do it, right? And a good place for companies to start on this is secured accounts like vehicles, right? For example, because there's some collateral there. Now, the thing that you have to ask them on top of that is, do you report to any of the corporate credit bureaus? That's Dun & Bradstreet, once again, Experian Business, and Equifax Business. And if you do, which one do you report? Because if you can find a lender that's going to report, you know that account, whatever money you're paying back on it, is helping you build corporate credit access, right? No other accounts do, if that makes sense. And the third thing is to remember what the purpose of corporate credit is in the first place. And this is more of a philosophical thing for business owners out there. When we spend money on our personal credit, most of the time it's because we're buying something, right? We're buying a house, we're buying a car, we're buying a vacation or something like that, right? We're spending money on ourselves for some sort of consumer satisfaction. Corporate credit is to make your company healthier. It's to grow your company to make it more profitable. You're either buying a new machine that's going to allow you to access a market you didn't access before. You're investing in a new facility. You're hiring staff, like you mentioned earlier, Ed. But you spend money to make money in business, right? It's
about investing into your business.
Exactly. It's about investment. And the banks know this. So the tranches of money that are set aside for corporate lending are not the same kind of tranches of money that are set aside for consumer lending by the major financial institutions. It's whole different silos. So that facilitates things like lower interest rates on the corporate side. It means that there's always going to be money out there for investment in companies without the personal guarantee if you know where to look. And if you look credible enough on paper to those institutions to be considered in the running for that money.
So Josh, one of the key things that you just said is if you know where to look. This is where someone like Josh comes into play, right? Having a resource to be able to go to, because again, as our title states, grow your business and minimize your risk. You need to be able to know how to go about doing that. So you need to be able to find someone, if you're like me, who's, really good at the people side and really good at certain elements of the business, but not so good at some of these other things that we just talked about, you're going to need a resource. And again, I highly recommend Josh as a resource. Again, his information is down below. He'll be happy to connect with you, talk with you, answer any questions you may have. Josh, it was an absolute pleasure getting to talk with you. And I know just from this conversation that we're going to have future podcasts, because just from this conversation, I could think of 2 or 3 more conversations on like topics that we could have as well.
I'm looking at all the prep I brought here and we didn't even get through half of it.
There's a lot there. And as small to medium-sized business owners, there's a lot of things to cover. And again, a lot of us are practitioners. We're really good at our craft or, doing the element of our business, but the whole other side of running it and what it takes and to finance it, all those things can be overwhelming. So having someone on your side to be able to advocate for you, to be able to walk through this process is so important. And Josh, thank you for being able to be here. and talking us through some of the elements of what this is like. It's been a pleasure having you.
It's been a pleasure being here with you, Ed. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week for another topic, typically business related or BNI business related, next week. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via email or any topics that you would like to discuss. You can email us at podcast with an S, podcast at bnisd.com. Again, that's podcast at bnisd.com. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
This episode of the BNI San Diego podcast has been brought to you by Cruise Productions, a San Diego-based video production company and proud BNI member. You can find us at the intersection where business and creativity meet, or online at cruiseproductionsinc.com.